800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. That's 800-823-5826.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to JoCo Community Radio.
Good evening, everybody. This is Nikki Bowman with Reach Council. Join us live here on Facebook or download the TuneIn Radio app. It's free, where we live live 365 on JoCo Community Radio, the voice of Johnson County, Texas. Reach's mission is to support safe and healthy choices vital to the well-being of our youth, families, and community. This show will guide you, educate you, and inspire you to be a part of a solution and to reach out and help make a difference in our communities. What began as a local movement in the city of Midlothian grew to include programs throughout Ellis County with only a few years and eventually expanded to our county, Johnson County, Texas. And tonight we are going to be talking about the opioid crisis, and we're waiting for our guest, Keith Humphreys, to join us. So I guess, Erica, you and I can chat a minute about the mental health conference. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I joined you guys last week. I am new to the field, but we do have an announcement about our mental health conference upcoming. It'll be on October the 8th at the Pathway Church here in Burleson. It will begin at 8:30.
I think it's 9 a.m. But yes, you can probably come in and start registering at 8:30.
Maybe do a little socializing. We will have some goodies to give away.
Did you say it's free?
It is free. I did not mention that, but it is free, and that's the most exciting part because I know how hard it can be to find good resources.
Yes, I'm so excited about it too. We have some great, amazing speakers. We're going to have breakout sessions. You get a free t-shirt with your sign up, and we're going to have some food trucks. So please come join us on October 8th for the Rise Mental Health Conference at Pathway Church in Burleson. So it looks like our guest has arrived. Hello, Mr.
Hi,
Humphrey.
how are you?
Hi, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. My name is Keith Humphreys. I'm calling in from Palo Alto, California, where I'm a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University, and I appreciate the chance to visit with everybody.
Yes, sir. And I'm sorry if there was any trouble getting you on, but I'm so glad that you're here. And I'll read a little bit about Keith. Keith Humphreys is the Esther Ting Memorial Professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. His research addresses the prevention and treatment of addictive disorders and the translation of science into better public policy. So you're at Stanford. That's neat.
It's a nice place. Feel lucky
Yeah.
to be here.
So what's y'all's temperature there?
Today it's about 80. It's been pretty unpleasant the last week or so, although nothing compared to Texas, I imagine.
Oh, it's like 104. But my sister used to live in San Francisco, and y'all, the weather is just amazing. Because Stanford's it's right outside of that, right? Am I close?
Yeah, we're about 50 miles south of San Francisco in a town called Palo Alto.
Yes, I was about to say that, but I didn't want to guess wrong. But yes, it's beautiful there. I got to drive up with her and visit the campus, and I remember the weather is kind of perfect. So, well, welcome, and I'm so excited that you're joining us. And I guess we can just kind of get started. We have a few different questions that can kind of lead everything. You want to start off with number one? Do you want to go? You can start.
Yeah. So this is Emily Steffelbein. Dr. Humphrey, I got to listen to you at CADCA. It was a convention that we all got to go to, and I thought your presentation was amazing. And I was just like, we just have to share it with everybody. And I guess that would be what we're talking about. So what would you say the current status of the opioid crisis is, particularly right now during COVID? Or I guess it's both.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're in a pretty dark place as a country. Every week, about 2,000 Americans die. Very sadly, even in the short time we're going to talk together today, it is likely that at least one person will die of an overdose. And it's affecting virtually every single community, certainly affecting every single state. We've made very little progress in slowing down the rate of overdoses. And on top of that, overdoses are horrible enough. But for every person who overdoses, there are many, many more who are addicted to opioids, things like OxyContin and heroin and fentanyl. And that's very difficult for them and very difficult for their families. COVID made it worse. There's no question it made it worse because COVID.
I was going to say, how did that explain that a little bit? But
yeah, sure. If you think about, there's sort of good things that help people who either to not get addicted or to stay in recovery if they've been addicted. And there's bad things in life that push us the other direction. And COVID took away a lot of good things and added a lot of bad things. So on the good side, it took away a lot of structure in daily life. It took away social connection. And I love that we can talk to each other over this technology, but we can't hug, it's a different interaction interpersonally. And so a lot of people are isolated. And those are losing that connection is tough on everybody, but it's also tough on people who have problems with
one
drugs.
of the things that I noticed was like you couldn't go to the gym anymore. And that's outlets for people, not only socially, but just to be able to go do that. And then you try to go buy equipment, when COVID first hit, there was no weights, there was nothing to be able to purchase. And I guess you're right. You just start turning to things if you don't have that healthy outlet. And there's so many other avenues that people are losing.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right.
What's crazy to me when you were saying those numbers, and this isn't like mainstream media like COVID is. Do you know what I mean? Like you're telling us how many overdoses there have been.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
Why are there so many reports on who has COVID and what the numbers are there?
You're absolutely right. It seems like as a country, we have the capacity to pay attention to a very small number of things. And COVID has pushed addiction off the front pages. It certainly got a lot of attention up until COVID hit. And I think that's partly because COVID was new and there is this sort of thing of new things make news. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say we're getting used to people overdosing, but we are probably getting used to people overdosing. And second, just as a practical matter, when I talk to, people in the news professions who cover health, a lot of them have been reassigned to COVID, so that's what, their editors say is important. That's what the public wants to hear about. And so not because, it's not, they don't think overdose matters either, but it's just COVID is the thing of the moment. And what I say is, of course, COVID is bad, but I just remember that most of the folks who are dying from overdose are young people. They're in the prime of life.
Right.
And so I know the number is lower, the number of people with COVID, but if you looked at years of life lost, it's actually very similar between overdose. So it should be taken as seriously, but at the moment it is not getting anywhere near the same attention that it did before COVID struck.
It's devastating.
Yeah, no, that's crazy to think about because I know just being in COVID, the most that I heard about was just suicide and domestic violence, and addiction, like you were saying, was not even present. So that just blows my mind because I didn't think about it before.
It's
and
like
you
it's a
mentioning
harder
it.
subject for people to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, it's
That is also true. I mean, it's stigmatized pretty
Mhm.
deeply, and for families, you know, I
Everything.
think there's a tendency to assume, like, if someone in the family has an addiction, that's a bad family or that's a bad person. And if you try, you went to the CADCA meeting, so you you travel around. There's met wonderful people at CADCA. The CADCA, by the way, is the Community Anti-Drug Coalition of America. Wonderful people who had buried kids. You know, loving,
Mhm.
fantastic parents that you'd love to have as your neighbors. It's just it's not fair to blame people, but people do, and that makes it people
I
understand.
wish that people would discuss and talk about the addictions before it takes them to why they're having to advocate for it. Like if you're going through it, start talking about it then, and then it'll be more, I guess, acceptable amongst our culture. And it's tough because you even at CADCA, the stories you're hearing is, like you said, wonderful families, Christians, or they're, coming from an attorney and a teacher. I mean, it's a family that you would not, so you can't blame or decide that this is why your child's going to become an addict. And I just wish more families understood that it's not their fault.
Me too. Me too.
Yes, I definitely feel that opioids don't discriminate when it comes to classes or
Definitely.
type of people.
They don't. I mean, it really
regions.
can get people that have money to, I mean, it doesn't matter that it doesn't have a radar there to decide who it's gonna pick up and who's gonna get addicted. So what do we need to do to stop it from, I guess, happening again with COVID or the pandemic? Is there anything that you have on that?
Well, I mean, as soon as we can get back to normal living, I think that's going to help a lot of people's mental health, which is, I think, our mental health right now for a lot of us is pretty stressed out by the last couple of years. That's going to help all of us, but it's certainly going to help people who experience this problem, because they'll have that chance of connection, chance of more daily structure, more rewards, even just rewards like, you can go to a movie now and, have some fun in life that doesn't involve drugs. I think that's going to help, but it's not going to take the problem away, because we have very active, markets of very strong drugs. And, anybody who's listening to this, I hope they all know what fentanyl is. Fentanyl is a synthetic, very, very strong opioid. It's so strong that even if I just had like as much as would cover the nail on my pinky and I inhaled it, that would probably be the last thing I would do. It's what we use for surgery. It's really, really strong, and it's everywhere. It's in not just in things that are sold as heroin, but it's in pills. The pills that might look totally real, and they, kids might think, oh, this is an Adderall. This is going to make me do better on the test, or this is an Ativan. It's an anti-anxiety drug. It's going to be fun to take, but it's not. It's fentanyl. So making sure everybody knows that, especially including our kids, but not limited to our kids, and also everybody knowing what naloxone is. Naloxone
Tell us
is
about that.
Yeah. So naloxone, which some people know is the word Narcan, and what that is, it's called an antagonist. What that means practically is you typically either inject it in somebody's muscle or you spray it up their nose, and that forces the opioid that's bonded to its receptor in the brain and is stopping your breathing. It knocks it out of that receptor, and then the person starts breathing again. So your EMS people will carry it. Quite a few police will carry it. Hopefully firefighters will carry it. But if you love somebody who has an opioid problem, you should carry it, so that you can rescue them in the event of an overdose. I have it. I have it in my home. I have it in my car.
I have one in my home too.
Yeah, you never know,
Can
right?
you assure everybody that isn't going to hurt anyone if they give it and
Yes,
it's
that's
not an overdose or
yes. Thank you for saying that. So,
Mhm.
so a lot of people think, I can't do that. I'm not a doctor. You don't have to be a doctor. If you make a mistake, let's say the person is fainted for some other reason and you administer naloxone, it's not going to hurt them. So it's okay to use. It's also cheap. You should be able to get generically. And in most states, and I'm pretty sure this is true in Texas at this point, I believe it's true every state, you can get it from the pharmacist for somebody else. In other words, you can go to your pharmacist and say, I love my son, and this is not for me, but can you give it to me in case I need to save him? And in most states, that's legal now, and so that's a way we can all take care of those.
So we were getting wonderful grants and able to get our hands on a lot of Narcan to pass out in the communities and work with other partners to be able to educate local police departments. And I don't know, the past 6 months, it's just been really tough to get our hands on it. And that's scary because you don't understand why that's, starting to lag and we're not able to see what the problem is when you would think they would be distributing more.
I agree with you. I mean, one of the things, that about addiction is there's a lot of grants. Okay. And when government gives us grants, it's thinking, well, this is a short-term problem. So we're going to give a couple of years of money and then that'll wrap that up and we'll move on to the next thing. There are no grants for cancer. There are no grants for heart disease. It's built into the structure of funding insurance and healthcare because of course, there'll always be people with cancer and heart disease. We need to get it through our heads, and we need to help our policymakers get through their heads that there's always going to be people who are addicted. This is not a 2-year grant problem. This needs to be something permanent. And for example, when you get your insurance, that is covered.
Right.
So.
And another thing is you mentioned this in the beginning that part of what leads to the opioid addiction is poor mental health. And I feel like that is where our country and nation are behind as well. We can't even get ahead of it. I mean, healthy people can barely get mental health help, even when they're good advocates for themselves to be able to go ask for it or get therapy and get the insurance to cover it. It's just a game. And you would think that they would want to be on the front of that and be able to hand that out like they'll hand out the pain pills if or whatever you need when you go to the doctor, whatever medication that they automatically prescribe you.
You're so right. And there's an incredible shortage of mental health services, particularly if you don't live in a city. As you go further and further out, I mean, where I live, there's a lot of mental health professionals. I don't have to drive very far, though, to be in places where you're really out of luck. You'd be waiting 6 months if someone with schizophrenia needs to see a psychiatrist. And so it's a terrible shortage. And you're also right that raises the risk for addiction. I mean, one reason why people use all manner of drugs is that it makes some mental health problems feel better in the short term. It takes my anxiety, it may not be healthy for me, but when I drink that fifth of vodka, my anxiety goes away. Or, I feel kind of depressed and, I take that oxy or I snort that cocaine, and at least for that moment, that depression goes away. And even though in the long term, that's a route to destruction, it's understandable why in the short term, people are tempted to do it because they can't get adequate mental health care.
A listener, Mason, just mentioned the military veterans can't even get good mental health care. And that is such a good point because you would think that they would be at the front of getting that care, especially for what they've done for our country.
It's certainly true that there is no population that is immune to this lack of services. I can say, I feel I should say that it is great that we have a VA, and they do offer a lot of mental health services for veterans, and that's great. At the same time, there's places that don't have good access to VA. So if you're in that area, happen to be one of those areas of the country, then it's much more of a challenge. Something good that has happened is in COVID, for years and years and years, I've been hearing we need to do more telehealth. We need to do more telehealth. Now we finally are. COVID made us do it. So the upside there is there are some people in rural areas who are getting access to a therapist for the first time in their lives because they can do it the way we're all doing it right now and not have to drive 3 hours to some city to see somebody like me.
Well, the county that we represent, it's Johnson County, Texas. And I can say that we are a rural community that doesn't have access to a lot of therapists, never mind psychiatrists. I don't even know how many are in our county, maybe 5 or less. I don't even know if that's correct.
Right. I think a lot of people are having to leave the county to
And that's
get
tough,
services.
especially with just the economy right now. I mean, even before with what COVID has done to families, and that is where we're seeing, like you mentioned, fentanyl. It's amongst our youth. And I was going to ask you, just kind of tagging off that, what do you think made fentanyl become such a crisis? Like, what brought that in? How did it get here? And
It's a really good question. So you have to go back a long way. So if we start back in the late 90s, opioid manufacturers, companies like Purdue Pharma, and the distributors, companies like Cardinal and McKesson, ramped up opioid prescribing in the United States about 400% in the space of 11 years. And also, I'd say a lot of regulators and people who should have stopped them, including doctors and healthcare systems, failed to stop them. And so everybody failed. And that created a huge pool of people who were addicted to opioid pills. And that then created an opening for illegal drug traffickers who started saying, wow, heroin costs a third of what an oxy costs. Maybe we could start converting some of those folks over. And they did. And then after that, traffickers figured out that fentanyl, which is entirely synthetic. So by that, I mean, you don't need farmers somewhere growing opioid poppies to ship 7,000 miles from Afghanistan or whatever. You can just do it all in a kitchen sink. It's so cheap for them.
I didn't know that.
So they thought, okay, we'll put it in there. And the profit margin for a trafficker on fentanyl versus heroin is about 100 times higher. So for them, they're like, okay, we're going to start swapping out that heroin and swapping in the fentanyl. And that also explains why, because you might think, well, if fentanyl kills people, why would you sell a product that kills people? And it's because the profit margin is so high. You can afford, this is a cold thing to say, but these are cold people. You can actually afford to kill a fair amount of your customers and you still make money because you're making 100 times what you make on heroin.
That makes so much sense. And I didn't know that the numbers were adding up like that. And that's just devastating, because I was wondering, why was something so lethal? Would drug dealers want to be distributing amongst the community? Because you'd think that they would want to keep their clientele or whatever. Then I didn't know that they were making 100% of other drugs, or even, heroin. That's just crazy to me. You don't have anything to add to that?
Well, no, I'm glad you asked that question, because I was actually thinking about it. Because before this job, I worked at the hospital for a little while. And on our particular floor, fentanyl, or I think it was that one, basically it was an opioid that the patients always requested. And they're like, not on this floor, but every other floor you could get it. And they never explained why we couldn't get it. They just...
What floor were you on?
I was on med-surg, so after all the surgeries and everything.
Do you have an explanation maybe on why they wouldn't give it on the after surgery floor?
Well, there's been a lot of changes in medical practice around opioids, but mostly positive changes. But so after about 2011, when we got up to this level of prescribing that no country on earth had ever experienced, finally people realized, gosh, we're addicting and harming a lot of people, and prescribing has gotten a lot more conservative since then. Sometimes too conservative. Sometimes someone
agree with that as well.
And they need it, But there's a lot of things that were going on 10 years ago with just opioids flowing out of everywhere that are far less the case in medicine. Fentanyl, I should say, by the way, don't be scared of fentanyl if you're getting it from your doctor for a surgery. If it's precisely measured out and the person is a trained medical professional, it's actually a really useful medical drug. I worked in hospice for 10 years. Sometimes like a fentanyl patch for someone with stage 4 cancer is the only thing that gives them relief and sleep through the night. So it's not the drug that's evil. It's selling it recreationally in widely varying amounts. That's what's evil.
or misrepresenting what it even is and not even
Right.
telling people that it's fentanyl.
Right.
That's
And that's what, yes, absolutely. That's a very cruel thing to do.
When did fentanyl start getting mentioned where you guys were seeing it as an issue?
So in East Coast, you would go back to around maybe 2014 or so when people start dying, and there and in Appalachia, where I'm from, in the Midwest. In the West, we've actually only started to see a lot of fentanyl deaths in the last couple of years. So it's like
I
any
would
other.
say that's the same for Texas. That
Yeah,
it
is it?
started about the past 2 to 3
Yeah,
years.
yeah. I think.
I mean, not for everybody, but just the
Yeah. Yeah,
rise.
it came to Texas, or there was sort of a big move west of the Mississippi over the last 3 years, and hit places like, I know Dallas, for example, has many more fentanyl overdoses now than they did 5 years ago.
I mean, it's crazy. And the number that we're hearing from our youth and in the high schools, and it's just, you would think there would be so many campaigns out there to educate parents who can then, or teachers. I mean, I feel like it should be something that's talked about the first day of school, and then it's it's almost the schools are afraid to even bring that up.
Yeah,
And-
I mean, schools are always in a bind. If they don't talk about drugs, kids can die. But sometimes if they do talk about drugs, then sometimes parents complain and say,
I know it's so tough.
They're squeezed.
They are, and I mean it's like even comes to bullying and all these other topics. It's they have their hands tied, and that they don't want anybody to get hurt. But then it's like, do we start talking about it when we have 5 youth that die at a party?
Yeah.
Why do we have to wait for that when there's already been 3? It's just, it's frustrating. And especially with what we do and what you do, it's even harder because we want the answers too.
Sure.
We're about to be going on commercial break, and then we will be back with you. I mean, we've got like 15 seconds, but I just wanted to warn you because then we get on a topic and we can't transition off of that because it just interrupts us. But
fair enough.
I guess we will be discussing some other things I bet we can brainstorm some good questions for you.
Great.
Okay, we'll talk to you in a little bit. Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Wilfred Brimley for Loafing Dog.
I'm Wilfred Brimley for Loafing Dog. When I get the hankering for a hot dog, I go to Cleveland, Texas. Just a couple blocks off the square, they got Loafing Dog. They got the Neely Dog, the Mary Sunshine Dog, the Casey Dog, and the Shirley Dog. Why, they even got the Pacer Dog, the Brooklyn Dog, and the Jim Dog. Can't forget the Shane Dog, or the Joy Dog, and the Monty Dog. I like that fool. Then the Kia Dog and the Braxton Dog round things off. Why, they even got a kid speaking too.
Loafing Dog, 208 East Chambers Street, Cleveland, Texas. Lunch, catering, or takeout, plus outdoor seating. Phone numbers 817-556-1040.
This is Wilfred Brimley. And don't forget, Loafing Dog won't give you diabetes.
Out of dead carpet giving you the blues? Tired of your old dingy and broken tile? Let my friends at the Floor Store in Cleveland, Texas give your home the makeover it deserves. This is Old Taco Joe coming to you for the Floor Store. Whether it's carpet, tile, wood flooring, or real wood laminate, the Floor Store can cover all of your flooring needs. Located at 405 West Henderson Street in Cleveland, Texas, owner Brent Harris can help. Shower tile, tub surrounds, even backsplashes. Give him a call today at 817-641-9444. The Floor Store, they got you covered.
When you're hungry for tender brisket or some delicious homemade cobbler, then look no further than Leach Brothers Barbecue, located at 1106 East Henderson, Cleveland, Texas. Leach Brothers has been family-owned and operated since 1950. Take it from me, Taco Joe Orwinski. Todd and his family have been filling my belly breakfast, lunch, and dinner for a long time. Heck, I even have my own booth, open Monday through Saturday, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Come see them for dine-in, carry-out, and all your catering needs. You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Welcome back. Joco Community Radio is proud to be the voice of Johnson County, Texas, and is live 365 on the TuneIn Radio Network. To listen or watch, simply go to the TuneIn joco.com. That's JOCO.com to choose where and how. The Community Radio app is now available for free on the Android and Apple devices. Simply search your store. Check out our lineup and more on jococommunityradio.com. This episode and more brought to you by Patriot Claims, making your insurance work for you. Reach out to your Texas sales rep, Nona Reed, at 844-TEX-HAIL. That's 844-839-4245.
All right. So welcome back, Keith Humphreys. Keith is the, Esther Ting Memorial Professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. And tonight we are talking about the opioid crisis. And we've been having some pretty good conversations, and we have some more questions for you. Great. So one of the things I was wanting to talk about maybe is just statistics with opioids, and I guess maybe even age ranges. Maybe you can kind of fill us in on that.
Yeah. So first off, for all addictions, they are far, far more common to start early in life. So if you walk up to a 50-year-old smoker and say, when do you start smoking? They'll almost never say when I was 40 or 30. They will almost always say when I was a teenager. So the big time in life where most people initiate opioids that gets them in trouble is when they're young, under 25. Addiction is spread throughout the entire population. It is a bit lower rate among the elderly, but not that much lower. And in fact, the elderly have had a pretty steep increase in addiction in the last 20 years as different generations, move into that age bracket. In terms of where deaths are concentrated, they're in the working age population. So there's in sort of the group of people is about 35 to 55 is where most of these deaths are found. So
wow, I wouldn't even think that.
Yeah, so those are people who may very well have started young and gone through a lot of struggle and all that, but there are people who overdose first time use opioids, particularly they're teenagers who are using fentanyl by mistake. But most people who overdose have had a long addiction history, like a decade of using opioids and other drugs, and then very unfortunately that takes their life.
And that's why it's so important to have the Narcan in the homes, especially like you said, if you do associate or have a family member that has had a past or current addiction. It's not a bad thing to have in the home. You'll save a life.
For sure. Oh, actually, on that, I started thinking about your presentation, and I know a lot of us were intrigued with the family situation. I wish I had the slide so I can look at it.
Can you share us a little bit about your presentation? Because I wasn't there, so I don't really know. I wasn't on that one. I was in CADCA, but not that one.
Well, I'll tell you what it came from. So there's a medical journal called The Lancet, and they approached me and my university, Stanford, to do a commission, and where we assembled 18 experts from around North America, and we analyzed, how bad is this problem? Why did it come about? And what could we do about it? And that's called the Stanford Lancet Commission on the North American Opioid Crisis. And anyone who's listening can get it for free and at the website we have, which is opioids, just with an S, opioids.stanford.edu. Opioids.stanford.edu. You can get the report. You can get our modeling.
That to the chat too.
And all our recommendations are there.
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. Opioids, OPIODS, that's opioids, .Stanford, that's the university, STANFORD.edu. And that also shows the recommendation. And it's very broad. I mean, the recommendations go from things like how do we regulate pharmaceutical industry better to how do we do more prevention, how do we improve our very uneven quality addiction treatment system, how do we invest in kids, particularly kids who are growing up in low income situations and have a lot of stress and a lot of risk of drugs. How do we do law enforcement better? And then how do we stop this problem from spreading around the world? Because, you know, we have it in the United States and Canada, but these same companies are very active in other countries. And it would be awful if, you know, this crisis just kept spreading and spreading and spreading, kind of like COVID has spread and spread and spread. We don't want that to happen with opioids. So we write about that.
Why do you think that United States is higher?
Well, I mean, the U.S. it has a very big and powerful opioid manufacturing sector that is very lightly regulated. Like if you compare this to Europe, the amount of, for example, as people when people from other countries come to the U.S., they see drug ads on television, and we're all used to that in the United States. Nowhere in Europe is that done. In fact, there's only one country on earth other than us that allows that. But that message, you know, we get that all the time. Take a pill, take a pill. There's a pill for everything. Take another pill. We're being flooded with all that has an effect.
And we even are flooded with it with all the side effects listed on the screen. You know,
I know it's like there's so many of them. You almost, you know, that it just kind of goes over our head. And also that marketing to doctors is legal in the United States at a much higher level than in other countries. You know, so you can give doctors all kinds of things. And they're always come in, and the pharmaceutical reps are unfailingly nice, charming, well-dressed, well put together. They have gifts. They're buying meals. They're saying, do you want to take a trip? We're going to be at this conference. Do you want to come to the party? It's on us. Well, that works. And in fact, we showed, you know, the counties that spent the most, where the most money was spent promoting drugs like that, had more overdoses a few years later. A lot of countries just don't allow it. And we say as a commission, we shouldn't allow it either. It's really a mistake. And it grates on me as a taxpayer, by the way, that's all tax deductible, all that promotion. So all of us, everyone who's listening and anyone in the country is actually subsidizing all those gifts to doctors to get them to prescribe in a particular way. It's nothing we say should not be the case.
I've seen it all the time in healthcare. They would offer, you know, a clock or a pen that has their logo on it, or sticky notes. And like I said, they would do dinners at like Papados, and they're doing their presentation, or Bobby V's. And
that's a steakhouse here in Dallas Fort Worth.
And, you know, come eat our dinner for free and watch our little presentation, or let us introduce you to our new medication that's upcoming and fabulous. And if you write some prescriptions, you know,
you get a back dollar too, obviously. I mean, there's got to be a money game, right? Doctors are getting some kind of payback.
Yeah. Well, that was actually one of the scandals. The biggest one was with Subsys, which is a fentanyl spray. And that was just a straight kickback thing. I mean, they were paying the doctors who prescribed the most. It was extremely expensive drug, tens of thousands of dollars a month. They were giving them a share of the profits, and they set up kind of a fake speakers bureau. So if you subscribe a lot, we'll put you in the speakers bureau, and you go give talks, and we'll give you enormous sums of money. So at least that was run by John Kapoor, who's now in prison. I'm not sorry to say, but you know, there's been that kind of corruption as well.
So, no, you know, whenever you mention that the age range is working class, 25 to 35, we learn in prevention that there's usually, whenever you have a young adult that gets addicted, it's usually starts with maybe an injury or some, you know, they get it starting prescribed with a doctor, and then it becomes an issue. And maybe the doctor doesn't stop. And then when it finally does stop, then that's whenever they, of course, start turning to the dealers. And I mean, any advice on what anyone can do?
So that's a really good point. And we've had some real changes about that. So in the '80s, you know, the first decade of this century, that it was overwhelmingly people were getting addicted from pills that came from doctors. And it would be just the way you told that story. Or it was, my dad got injured and he left some of his pills there, and I started taking them and selling them at school, and I liked them, and then pretty soon I got addicted. So that happened a lot too. So when prescribing started to decrease, then there were these illegal markets of heroin and fentanyl and street oxy, and now people start entering that directly. So we have people, a lot of people now are getting addicted, and their first use of an opioid is not anymore from the doctor's script, it's from a street dealer. And so that's what you see more commonly now, and that's a much faster progression. Those drugs are
Why do you think that they're
dangerous.
even? What is the reasoning that you're seeing that they start, like someone just decides to do that? Is it just a different pill, or are they wanting an opioid?
Yeah, why do people take drugs at all? I mean, drugs feel good. They all feel good, and it's this basic dilemma we have just in humanity, right? So many things that feel good in the short term are bad in the long term. Whether it's a drug or whether it's yelling at someone we care about to blow off steam and then damaging the relationship, or whether it's I'm going to buy this sticky bun and this arty coffee for $5 when I really should be putting that in my retirement plan that I'm going to use in 40 years. I mean, that's just like this basic challenge of being a person. And adolescents face it as much as anybody, but it's a different developmental phase where the brain is not as developed and they're not as far seeing as adults are. And what happens now matters a lot to an adolescent. More, and so it's like, well, you're at a party. If you take this, it'll feel good in the short term, and also perhaps you'll get some social approval. Your friends will say this is a cool person I want to hang around with, and kids being kids, a lot of them will then say, okay, well, give me the pill. And if tragically that pill, which says Ativan, turns out to be full of fentanyl, that may be the last thing that poor kid ever does.
Do. So, question, in your classes at Stanford, can you tell us, I'm kind of interested on what you teach and what students maybe take your classes and.
Sure. Really different kinds of things. So I'm happy to say that every single person who gets a psychiatry specialty at Stanford or anywhere in the United States has to take a course on addiction. This was not the case before.
That's
so
amazing.
My colleagues and I teach them that. So I'm happy to say we don't graduate a psychiatrist who doesn't know what addiction is and what to do about it.
And that hasn't always been the case.
No. And in fact, if you go back, to previous generations, you could find people who graduated psychiatrists who got, even though you can't work in psychiatry and not see patients, addicted patients, but they wouldn't get any training on it. And it's still true in medicine, although a lot of universities, including mine, has committed to give all the other specialties and generalists training in addiction. There's still a lot of schools where you can get an MD without really getting much training in addiction. You might get a couple hours exposure to it, and that's no good because, and sometimes when you talk to these young people, they say, well, I don't want to treat addiction. I'm going to be a primary care doc. I'm going to be an emergency room doc. I'm going to be a surgeon. Well, you can't practice those specialties and not deal with addiction. Maybe your patients won't tell you it's there, but a huge number of things you're doing, you think, well, I'm a cardiologist. This person has unstable angina and a high blood pressure. It's like, what it is they drink a lot. That's what you're actually treating. Or, oh, he fell down the stairs. He's clumsy. Maybe he has a neurological. No, he smokes an awful lot of cannabis. That's why he falls all the time.
And imagine how many ERs really are dealing with this. I remember
they're full of it.
Years ago, my daughter cut her finger and we're in the ER, and this man threw himself out of a wheelchair because he was waiting and he thought that would get him in the room faster to then get the drug that he was wanting. And I mean, of course, people are, the doctors aren't in a hurry to get in there or to even let him think that that's going to work.
Yeah.
But they're dealing with it. That's exactly who's dealing with it. Or the, general practitioners, they're having people come in, like you said, mental health issues, and then they're not getting that. And then they go to something else, and then they are dealing with addiction.
Yeah. No, if you want to smell alcohol on people's breaths on a Friday night, you can do it in a bar. You can also do it in an emergency room. I mean, just very common people coming in accidents, in fights, or people have been assaulted, people have assaulted people, all that kind of stuff. And the other thing you asked, just to say, the other part of teaching that's the more optimistic part for me, is undergraduates really, really want to learn about addiction. And there's quite a change. So my colleagues who teach on their addiction, it fills up in like 5 minutes. I'm not exaggerating. The second it goes online, all these students are like, I want to learn about it. I know,
because I'm sitting here thinking that those classes would be so interesting, and you would. I mean, that's good that those classes are filling up.
I think so too. I think so too. And sometimes the kids are wiser than the adults, And I noticed that among doctors in all specialties, there's been a big generational change about prescribing opioids. People, 20 years ago, the amount of concern they would express to me, knowing he's the addiction guy, was very low. And now I get asked that a lot, from people. These are not addiction people, maybe they're just primary care docs or whatever, and they're much more careful and concerned about, I want to help this patient, but I don't want to harm them. And so I have to think through carefully this script. I think that's a good generational change in American medicine.
I think so too. And I wish that they had an addiction class mandatory. College,
part of their CEUs.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing we said in the commission is, if you can get you get your license to practice medicine from your state board, but you get your license to prescribe controlled drugs from the federal government. And every doctor who wants to, prescribe oxy or benzodiazepines, whatever, has to have that license. We said you should not be able to get that license without being trained in the potential addictive effects of these drugs and how to recognize them and handle them if you end up with a patient who was prescribed, maybe they prescribe benzos for sleep and then they get addicted. What do you do about it?
What's the response on that when you're requesting and being nice about that?
So far it's been pretty positive. There's been a push, I think probably a mistaken push to really emphasize you can't prescribe, a drug called buprenorphine, which sometimes people know as Suboxone or Subutex. You can't prescribe that without lots and lots of training in addiction. But there is weirdly no rules about prescribing OxyContin and having training for addiction. So if you stand up in a room, as I have in front of a bunch of doctors, and say, why is it that a medication for addiction you have to have lots of training, but a drug that addicts and kills lots of people you don't have to have any? And everyone gets it then that's really crazy.
I mean, just like you were mentioning with cannabis, and then we're seeing the rise with that issue in ERs and around the country. I would hope, especially, and you realize, I'm sure you know that the older doctors maybe aren't getting the information that the younger doctors are getting about marijuana. And I'm just hoping that the undergrads, as you see, that are coming through school are realizing that this is an issue, and they want to be a part of the solution, not the problem.
I see that at least at Stanford. So the generational problem with cannabis is that the cannabis that's available now is 5 times stronger than what people who are my age know of, right? And so you might get, a doctor in the 60s might think, well, cannabis, that's a pretty low potency drug that no one could have a problem with, and they don't, and because their generation's experience was beer, and this generation's experience is vodka, in terms of the strength. And I was talking to one of my friends who teaches the undergrad addiction course, and she asked the students, what is the substance you are the most concerned about? And they said cannabis. And because a lot of them had friends who were like flunking out of their classes because of cannabis use and smoking cannabis every single day. I thought, well, that's great. They're far more aware of it than their parents probably are about the potential problems that can come from cannabis. You talk to people, 50, 60, 70, they still have the view, most of them, that nobody ever is hurt by cannabis. And that's just
right.
Not true.
It's not addicting. It doesn't have any side effects.
Right. And it cures everything too,
And you're right, though. It's not the same. It's not what was going on in the 70s or 60s, or, probably even the 80s. I feel like the past 10 years, it's really gotten lethal.
Yeah. Well, so we had, in the 70s, so the principal intoxicating part of cannabis is a drug which we shorthand THC, and in the 70s it was maybe 3 to 5% of what people would smoke, and now the average product is over 20%. So that's many times more strength. And there are some products out there like shatter and some of the waxes and edibles that are 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%. And, people ask me, what do they do? And I say, we don't know, because we've never studied anything.
That's what I was going to say. What is shatter?
Shatter is a wax. Basically you can, now that you have an industry and they can do all the things that other, industries always try to make their products more potent because it's more addictive. But there's different ways now of extracting pure THC from the plant. And that's what, these high strength products have, pulled all the THC out of a bunch of plants and then sold as this compound that a person can consume in a variety of ways. And it's super, super strong, way stronger than anything you'll find in just like a plant matter.
Everybody always wants more, right? You have to go
Well,
bigger
yeah,
and
and sellers want more. I mean, think the lesson of fentanyl is even when the customers don't want more, customers weren't saying, please sell me a product that kills me. If you're the seller, you want more because more potent drugs are more addictive drugs, which are more profitable drugs.
Got it. True statement.
Yeah.
Okay, we have 8 minutes left. So I want to talk a little bit about like just answers and things that maybe some smart things that the states, cities, counties can do to spend, I guess, the lawsuits. Oh, tell me about the opioid lawsuit settlement. I don't
Yeah, so there have been many, many big settlements now at the state level, and there's what's called a multi-district litigation settlement, and they're from the companies that made the opioids, the companies that distributed them. There's also lawsuits against pharmacies that let huge numbers of doses out there, and that's now flowing down to states, counties, and cities. And it's really important that we spend this money intelligently. If you're as old as me, you remember the tobacco settlement. We got all this money from all the people who died from tobacco, and a lot of that was spent on, patching potholes and stuff like that. And that wasn't what it was supposed to be for. It was supposed to be spent on prevention, and paying for cancer care and stuff like that. So I hope the money is going to be watched more carefully. But one of the most important things we can all do is be engaged citizen and watch carefully. CADCA is really important for this because those are often the most engaged people in communities around these issues. But be asking your mayor, asking your county commissioners, how much money did you get and what exactly are you doing with it?
That's we just met with the mayor a few months ago and we didn't
Good
ask
for you.
that. But we didn't ask that. So maybe we can get back on his agenda and go in there and ask that.
It's worth asking. We all need to do that because, big checks, when they drop out of the sky, there's no guarantee they'll be well spent.
I think he might have mentioned it when he found out what our mission was. Were you in there?
I want to say that he did, but they weren't for sure on whether they were getting it or not.
Or what they didn't have a plan for it. So any I guess strategies for us to go to them and things that might
it should all be all be pushing sensible things. I mean, certainly a lot of this will probably be at the county level and the National Association of Counties. I've been working with them on materials for counties to understand things like naloxone, for example, and like what it's used for and what the treatments are and what to do to stop people in that very high risk period, like when they leave a correctional facility and they have extraordinary overdose rate and kind of care you need to provide to that population and what to do for prevention and all that sort of stuff. That's where I think a lot of this would be felt. There's also a number of useful documents out there. One you can find on the page of the Legal Action Center. I can't remember the top of my head, but it was led by my colleague Richard Frank, and I worked on it. It was supported by the Arnold Foundation, but it's just advice to states, cities, and counties on what are sensible investments to make with this money you're going to get to abate the damage of the opioid crisis. And we're going to need to work on everything at once. We're going to have to do kind of prevention work that CADCA does, but we'll also have people who are already addicted, and it's too late for prevention, but we can save their lives with naloxone, and then we can get them into treatment is the important thing, because we don't want a life where you overdose every 6 months for the rest of your life is livable, but it's sure not very pleasant or for that person or their family. So the best thing is more recovery.
Any advice on how to just get because that's kind of more of a, I guess, government take, but how do we get the community involved?
I think what you're doing right now is very important. The fact that you have the show is great and that you're talking about addiction. I think the kinds of things CADCA does are really terrific. There's a lot of people who would like to help and they just don't know how. And, they feel like, what can one person do? And it's like, well, the answer is, of course, one person can't do much, but groups of people can do a lot. So the fact that, there are anti-drug coalitions in this country where, concerned people, parents, teachers, pastors, police, healthcare workers can come together and work, I think that's a terrific asset to communities out there to organize our response.
Any success stories that you've just witnessed over the years that you want to share with?
Oh man, many positive. It's like something like 300,000 overdoses have been reversed in this country with naloxone.
I mean, that's good news, because sometimes we need to hear the good news.
Yeah, because many of those people would have died or lived and had brain damage.
So 300,000 have been saved by Narcan. Is that what you're saying?
300,000 people, over 300,000 people have had overdoses reversed with naloxone. And it's not that true every one of those people would have died, but that still a lot of them would have. That's a really big deal. The expansion of, in my home state, West Virginia, that we, took the Medicaid expansion, that we dramatically made addiction treatment more available throughout the state, including a lot of my home state has some pretty serious economic challenges. That gave access to care to people who never would have got it, certainly saved an awful lot of lives. We've got a recovery community, an increasingly active, visible recovery community and movement. I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to the recovery movement because they're destigmatizing and they also provide something everybody needs, which is hope, realistic hope.
I mean, they're the angels in the area that are, helping others on what they've been through as well. And I mean, we all need to be thankful that they are brave enough to kind of stand up and help others.
Yes, absolutely.
Any more questions, Chris? No.
I don't have
We
a
have
question
like 1 minute.
in particular, but I just feel like you have just a wealth of knowledge in your head. We've been just.
I mean, I think it's so interesting. And I know that it's hard to teach what you teach, but it's also it just has so much meaning. And I mean, we appreciate that you do that because the youth or the students that you are educating, it's so important. So I appreciate what you do as well.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for coming on with us. And we
Thank
will
you. God bless you all.
Yes, sir. Yes. God bless you.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.
If you're trying to quit drinking or doing too many drugs, listen to me. You don't know me and we'll never meet. I had a problem like you once. I drank and used to party a little too much till it got out of control and almost ruined my life. I realized I needed help to fix my problem before it totally destroyed me. If you've tried to fix your drinking and drug problem and you know you can't do it alone, you need to call the National Treatment Advisors. They'll immerse you into a 30-day program to replace your old habits with new habits and totally change your life. And if you have PPO private health insurance, the entire program may be covered. Fix your problem right now before it gets any worse. Get clean. Call now and learn more. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581.
At Romika Designs, we're more than just a laser engraving and specialty design company. Much more. I'm Ron Phillips, co-owner of Romika Designs, and if you can dream it, we can probably make it. We can custom laser cut and engrave on nearly all material. Great for one-of-a-kind gifts, home decor, business and specialty items, or personalized and logo design.